Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to this panel. So this is all about the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of starting up a business, whether this is a tech business or a game company. In the interest of time, I have skipped to question 3, so we're getting right into the nitty-gritty. But first, actually, you should introduce yourselves. So if you could all just introduce yourselves and tell us about what your startup is, essentially.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Amandine Flax, and well, actually, my startup is dead. So I'm here to talk about failure and experience of that. But basically, it was called widened, and we were building machine learning game AI for video games. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully this goes better than the 30-second buzz I did. I like more than game audio, clearly. My business is developing ethical, responsible tools for musicians that can help speed up their workflow so they can make money without feeling threatened by AI. So.
Okay. So hi, my name is Diego Perez. I'm, have a few hats, part of the iGGi team, also senior lecturer in computer games and AI at Queen Mary, and co-founder with Raluca over here of a spin-out called Tabletop R&D. What we do is we provide automatic testing services for tabletop board game designers. 1.5 years old, more or less.
Okay, so thank you. So the first question is, how do you determine whether your research is better suited for publication or patenting, and how do you balance the pressure to publish?
Well, I'll pass on this one because we haven't patented, we haven't published, and we built just for commercialization. So maybe that's one for you guys.
I suppose I'll start because when I did my first interview, I think Paul will remember, in my very first iGGi interview, I asked, how's IP work? So I kind of planned it far ahead. There is a thing you can do called a priority date where if you're not ready to file the full patent, you can pay a small fee, and then you get 18 months to file the patent, even if the information is publicly available. So that's a good safe route to go. And then I also know people over in engineering, and they were just I write my whole thesis, I file my patents, and then I publish papers right afterwards. But obviously, it's easier to pass a viva with some papers, isn't it?
I think in our case, because we're members of staff, we are not necessarily needed to publish what we do for the company. So that facilitates a little bit. We haven't patented either. We are thinking of potentially patenting, but that's still in discussion. I'm not sure we will do it or not. But yeah, there's always that conflict, because even when we do research that is associated to it, or when we write grant proposals that are associated to the problem, we are not sure exactly what can be published and what can be published. So actually, I don't really have a good answer for this question. We are still trying to figure out what to do with it. We know what we want to protect, but at the same time, the methods, technologies, the algorithms we are using are well known. So if we write a new way of doing testing for AI, we're probably going to publish it anyway, unless it's truly innovative. We want to keep it.
Well, we were kind of in the same situation ourselves, and we decided to just focus on commercialization completely because of that, because we didn't really invent new approaches to machine learning or to games, but we did make it work. And so we found that it has more potential on the commercial aspect. But then it's all about your own situation, what you're doing. So if you're already doing research, you may want to publish and then turn that research into a product. So every situation is different. And I think it's about trying to understand what it means really to protect your IP, what it means really to build a company, and then to see what you can do with your own situation and with your own work.
Just going to jump back in as well. There are other ways to protect IP outside of a patent. If you have disseminated a small amount of information, or even not a small amount of information, you can often apply for a patent that's much narrower, but it's just not as good protection. But there are also things like designs where you can get the design of a user interface patent, not like patented, but protected in a different way. But that is, again, much more narrow than a normal patent, so it's worth considering.
Okay, so what steps did you take to protect your IP before pursuing commercialization?
I can say something. Well, first of all, because we are a spin-out of Quemery owns the IP. That's the first thing to say. So we have a license to commercialize it. The protection comes from what Quemery asks us to do, essentially. We sign a few forms defining what's part of the IP and what's not part of the IP, and essentially who are the contributors and inventors to that particular intellectual property. So that's all filed in. And that's basically what we have. Yeah.
Well, talking from the commercial aspect, I would say there's lots of ways to protect yourself. But something on the business side is to find a way to differentiate yourself. And I'm talking about differentiation of your technology, of your product, of your approach, having a good understanding of why what you're doing is defensible and different from your competition, but also in terms of narrative, the way you're explaining and framing what you're doing, what it's used for, the problem it's solving, that's a way also of kind of protecting yourself, not legally, but commercially protecting your solution and explaining to your customers what you're doing and why they should buy, and why it's different from what the competition is doing.
Just going to jump in as well with, sorry, move the mic away. Definitely strong branding is useful, because especially if you're competing with people who are behaving questionably in regards to ethics, having a strong sort of basis of this is all ethical and it's certified by a company that will check that kind of stuff is useful. There's also, even if you put a paper out, the information can be there, but if you're not giving the code away, you've kind of protected that separately, because you don't always have to give the code away. But there's also generally, you can just call it know-how. Rather than having a patent, you can just be like, we know how to do this, we explain some of the details, but it can still be so difficult that it's very hard for someone to replicate even with money. So,
jumping on that, I want to add, you have to ask yourself, why do you want to protect your IP? And the answer to that will help you understand what you need to do to protect your IP. You mentioned brands. We talk about commercialization, the legal aspect as well. Depending on your ambition, if you want to raise money, you need to own your IP. You need to be able to show to investors that what you built belongs to the company they're investing in. And later on the way, if you are working with larger corporations, they will also need to understand and to make sure that you own what you're going to use to work with them. So, depending on what you need the IP for, that may also help you in the decision process and research process.
I would say that we have two parts of IP. One will be the know-how, as you said, and the one will be also the private code that is not public. And in a way, we keep these two as well, because that allows us to decide what we want to do in the future. So we have the opportunity of open the source code and then keep the know-how, or we can play with that as well. So keeping your option open, I think, is a good thing to do as well.
So the next question is, what are the biggest advantages of collaborations between industry and academic partners?
Okay, I can say something also with my hat as iGGi industry liaison as well. Well, we've been trying that for a long time, and even this morning we were talking about that as well. Bringing the industry into what you do academically is actually one of the best things, I think. I'm later thinking that you can do. It gives you a real case where you apply the stuff that you're doing. You can see people using it. In fact, I think that's probably the best thing that we have had in our startup is talking to designers and see that what we provide, the data we provide, the service we provide is useful for them, and they make changes in the game designs to essentially make changes depending on what they see in the data. So for the academics, being able to see that their work actually has an impact, I think is very rewarding. And well, hopefully for industry, that's basically the whole idea of iGGi as well, right? Being able to bring the research, the latest research ideas into companies, into normal practices, and be able to be upfront of what's happening. So I think, yeah, in both cases, it's a great that you can make it work, even if sometimes it's not necessarily easy.
I guess mine is largely theoretical at the minute, because I'm in the middle of sort of setting up strategic partnerships with some industry companies. But I found it's very useful as a way to, like, they have a lot more connections, so you can kind of leverage those connections to get a better board of advisors. But then there's also the aspect of, like, industry people tend to think differently. Like, we are often very technical as academics and, like, problem orientated, and, like, sitting and thinking about and ideating solutions for, like, 3 years, rather than, if you look at books like The Lean Startup, the entire point of the book is, what is the absolute bare minimum that you can test your idea with an actual consumer, rather than trying to make this fully polished thing that could be published in a journal. And, like, sometimes you need that varying perspective for it to actually work, I think.
I've worked with startups my entire life, so I'll represent the startup side here. I haven't personally worked at a startup where we collaborated with academics. However, I can see lots of potential where you can make the most of the network. You can be part of the network, whether you're a student or a company. Proof I'm here today, right? But there's also opportunities to do research together, to share resources. You know, startups tend to move fast, break things, and have people within the team that have lots of different skills, but they kind of try to do everything and anything, right? And sometimes partnering with academics who are specialized in one specific domain can really give you access to some resources that you may not have access to. So, you know, partnering with a grant proposal, for example, partnering on a research application, having, you know, if you're a startup, maybe having some university and some academics testing out your product, getting you feedback, or just collaborating on a research paper. I think there's lots of different ways. Once again, there is no one solution that fits all.
Just to jump in as well, I think, I can't remember the name of the book. If you find me afterwards, I will tell you. But there's this thing called the decision-making unit, where if you're customer-facing or if you're business-facing, as, like, the business being your customer, it's understanding who makes the decisions. So if you're targeting, like, one person, or, like, a composer, for example, or, like, indie game devs, the decision-making unit is a lot smaller. And if you're targeting bigger companies, the decision-making unit is absolutely massive, and it's hurdle after hurdle of people who can actually veto your stuff getting used. And, like, having those collaborations, even if you're not planning to commercialize, is very useful for getting a view into that and seeing, like, who are the people I actually need to talk to get this thing actually bought so that I can make money, instead of just sitting waiting for the lights to go off.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. So now we're going on to kind of the bad of starting up. So have you encountered any significant setbacks, challenges, or failures? How did you navigate them?
I can start. So yeah, my startup failed, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where to start, really, because I've learned so much. When you start a business, you don't necessarily think about failure, but it's also in your mind, and it should be, because 90% of businesses, startups, fail. So the odds are against you when you start, right? So you may put all efforts physically, mentally possible into your business. It may still not work in the end. Maybe you made mistakes. Maybe you made too many mistakes. Usually, startups don't die because someone makes one mistake. It's an accumulation of things. Maybe things don't work out in the ecosystem. Maybe your tech wasn't solving the right problem. There's lots of different things, and I've learned a lot from all of them. But it's all about understanding what failure means and setback and how you react to that. So every day when you build a business, every day you make decision. And I'm not talking about having like a board meeting or meeting with all executives and making big decisions. I'm talking just about every day waking up and deciding what you're going to spend your time on. Are you going to be spending most of your time building your business today, building your, the tech? Are you going to spend time emailing people? Are you going to go to this conference that may take 2 days or 3 days of your time? Are you going to spend 6 months fundraising and maybe not succeed to raise money? So how you're going to spend your time is part of the decision, and it's failure and setbacks is something inevitable. You have to be ready for that. But then you have to recognize them. You have to constantly analyze how you're doing things, why you're doing it. Should you keep doing it? Should you change your approach? And every day you have to kind of act on that. I can talk about it for hours, by the way.
I'll jump in. One of the earlier questions is very informed by my horror story of going to the tech office and saying, a paper's about to be in review, but it really, really needs patenting, and then bugging them for 9 months and it not getting patented, and now it being unprotectable, and it being the core of my business, and that's led to some other sort of negotiation difficulties. But I'm at the phase now where I'm getting offers for pre-seed funding, and if you don't have a patent, you need a very, very clear strategy for protecting your IP. So that's probably the biggest hurdle I've faced now, is just not having a patent, because and a patent is essentially just an exclusive negative right. You can legally and enforceably say to someone, you can't do this, it infringes too much. But now I've got to sort of try and do it faster and better, I guess.
I gotta say we've had failures yet. We probably have them because it's normal to have them, as I learned now. We've had hurdles along the way because of the low risk that we have. Maybe there's a question about that later, maybe. It hasn't been too problematic, but for instance, we had a few contracts lined up, and then the clients decided not to have budget at that point, and then they fell. During a certain time, we had too many people interested, and then we couldn't take them all. And then when we took some of them, then those are the ones that decided to go back and say no. So yeah, what can we talk about that? Had to pivot a little bit as well. Our main clients don't have a lot of money, so we have to think how they can actually be our clients. So yeah, trying to think of how to change a little bit what we're doing so that we can adapt better to their possibilities, and we can still provide the same service. So there are these small challenges along the way that we have to deal with. But I wouldn't say we have a failure yet, hopefully.
Just going to also throw in sleep deprivation is a killer. It's bad. If you're going to do full-time anything and part-time run a business, that part-time run a business feels a lot more like 75% of doing something rather than... So try and account for not commuting.
Yeah, 2 jobs at the same time is not good.
In the startup world, we used to say that running a business is actually like running a marathon and not a sprint. It doesn't matter if you spend months trying to ship your product without sleeping, because in the end, once it's out, you still have to sell it, and you are going to spend days and months and years working on it. So better take care of yourself and not burn yourself. There is a fine line between being involved in what you do, believing in what you do, making time for it, and actually being able to run it on the long term.
Okay, thank you for those answers. So moving on, I'm going to skip this question because we only have 5 more minutes. So to the ugly. So starting a company is inherently risky. What are some of the biggest risks you have encountered and how did you manage them?
Being spin out of university and being staff, that actually minimizes the risk quite a bit. I understand many people go full-time, leave their jobs to pursue the startups, and that can be very risky because you're basically putting all your eggs in the same basket. We are still keeping our jobs, last time I checked, I hope. So yeah, if the business fails, that's okay. We can still have a salary and so on. So in that regard, is not too risky. Obviously, that limits how much can you do and the potential that you can have and how easily you can turn some good ideas into a good business. But we are still navigating all that. One risk as well, in this case, would be navigating the space of having 2 jobs at the same time and being able to know when it's time to do business stuff and when it's time to do your normal university teaching, research, etc. role at your institution. Depending on your position in your career, that might be easier or more difficult. And yeah, there have been complicated times, and hopefully now they come a little bit easier in the next couple of months or year.
Risk is quite a personal notion, depending on your own situation. It's funny because starting a business is actually on its own. What's the risk? What does it mean? Really taking a risk? Is the risk of failure? And that's not really a risk. I mean, odds are against you, so there are big chances that your business at some point is going to fail or face some challenges. It's not really like a reason to not do it. Now, what about the risk of having remorse because you haven't taken the opportunity? That's a real risk for me. I mean, that's one of the reasons we started our business, because my co-founder and I, we had this idea and we thought, okay, we are in a situation where we can both jump into this adventure together at the same time, which, it's something that didn't happen for a very long time. For a while, we thought about different ideas, and it wasn't a good timing. So for once, the timing was good. And we thought, the market seems to be about right. You can't really time the market, but that seems like a good moment to do it. And then we thought, what if we don't do it? What if we just, forget about it, keep it in the back of our head? And I think for us, not starting was more of a risk of having remorse. But depending on your situation, it may be different. I mean, if you start your business and it fails, that's not going to be the end of the world. But what if it fails and you struggle finding a job afterward? That is a real risk, especially given the current environment. That's a kind of things that we need to think about rather than really the risk of starting a business, especially if you're not spending your entire savings into your business and you try to be smart along the way. The risk depends on your situation and what really affects you. The risk on your mental health as well can be tough. I mean, you fail at a project. It never feels good, but when it's your business, it's kind of your baby. It's something that you really put energy into and time into. Mentally, it's something very hard to say it failed. I didn't manage to make it work. So that's a kind of thing to think about in terms of risk.
I think as well, for a lot of this room, it's probably very understandable because I think academics have quite a high rate of being anxious and depressed. And I think that just comes with any career, especially ones in games, where you just vocationally, you really love the thing that you're doing, and then when it doesn't work, it sucks. But there's also there are risks, and you have to understand your risk appetite. And to understand your risk appetite, you have to really have a grip on your motivations. So for me, when I think about it, when I'm speaking to VCs and they're like, well, if we funded you, we want you to go full time, you can't do another job as well. I have to really weigh up what are the outcomes that come from staying in academia or going into a business, and then this is not an invitation for political questions, by the way, at the end. But when I think about like pensions and stuff, and think about my kid and like, where's the world going to be in like 20 years when he's a grown up? I'm like, is it worth me taking a risk now because more money for him? And sometimes you just got to kind of make that balance, don't you?
You still think you're going to have pension? That's
No,
sweet.
I don't. But I didn't want to make everyone cry.
Okay, so thank you so much for all of your responses. I know we had to skip a few questions there in the interest of time, so during the coffee break, feel free to pick their brains. So I'm going to go to audience questions in case anyone has anything burning right now. So yeah, the floor is open for questions.
Hello, thank you very much. Yes, great panel. I've not really been involved with patents, despite my grizzled appearance. But I wondered if you had any... when deciding between publishing and patenting, you've also got to ask yourself how much is it going to cost to defend this patent, and whether or not that affects your decision making. Because how worthwhile is going to the courts and running a defence is vile, I'm sure.
I'm going to jump in here because my main sort of competition is Apple, and I was like, well, each of their
You're
lawyers,
fucked.
each of their lawyers gets paid like probably 20 times what I get a year. So that's definitely a thing. Like a patent is, if you do you can do like an audit to see if there's any overlap anyway, and that can cost like £2,500 for the UK, and then usually that gets taken away from the cost of a patent, but a patent can be anywhere between 7 and 10. So you have to really think about what are the funds available to you, and are you willing to go to court for like years and years and face that? Like for me, it would be totally pointless anyway, because Apple would just crush me like a grape. But for other people, I guess it's different.
Still have to factor in the funds. So even if we are not against Apple, that's still a lot of money. So
Yeah, stuff.
Okay, I think actually that would be our last one. This one's really quick.
Hopefully it's really quick. I just wonder whether you had external investment and what your view is on that.
I'm happy to jump in. We haven't had external investment. We had some opportunities. So basically, initially we were trying to do a B2C business where we needed to raise money. So we started raising money, and then we pivoted to B2B in order to avoid raising money. So the thing is, I do have personal experience with fundraising. I have worked with startups who have fundraised. I have also been a VC scout for a seed fund in London. So I do have a good understanding, I would say, and I used to have a good network, and still I didn't manage to fundraise for my startup. So it's tough. I think it is worse to anyone trying to build a business to first start to understand the venture capital environment and how it works and how they make money, so you can understand whether it is for your type of business or not. Because to make money, VCs need to invest in companies who are going to do multiple rounds, so raise several rounds of funding, which means that you need to, as a founder, you need to have enough equity to sell in each of these rounds. And then, in the end, venture capital are going to make money if you sell the company, so if you are getting acquired, or if you IPO. Now, the IPO market is tricky these days, but there's lots of acquisition. So I would say it's not necessarily a bad path or a good path. It is for a certain type of companies who are going to be able to address a market big enough for the VCs to make their money back. And so you need to understand how VC work. Now, in terms of equity, that may be a bit controversial given we are at a university. But I want to say, if there is something that universities can do to support entrepreneurs, is to take less of their equity. I have heard, no, really, I have heard lots of stories from founders, and when you start with a big chunk of the pie that you don't own, then you're not going to be able to sell this equity in the different round. And in the end, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. I have seen companies who had like a third party, either a university or a third party, owning a chunk of the company, and it prevented them from raising the next round. So they were stuck in a situation where they had a first round, meaning that people believed in their business and the fact that they could address a market big enough for VC, but then they couldn't raise the next funding, and they were kind of stuck there with very short runway. So, yeah, long answer for a short question, sorry.
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt. So that has to end here because we don't want to be late for the key talk and everything, the coffee break. So thank you so much again to our panelists. Please give them a round of applause.
Okay, so very quickly before we all leave, we're going to have a shorter break, so we should please all be back here for 3:15 on time, so we can start at 3:15, so be